Welcome, guys, to the official Pretotyping podcast, where we basically talk about everything to do with pretotyping. And so in this season, you will learn about different aspects of the methodology, hear from different pretotyping practitioners, and even see us try to make our own, all in the spirit of validating your idea with your own data. I'm Jonathan Sun.
And I'm Robert Scrub.
Our next guest needs no introduction. He is the creator of Exponentially, the first ever online pretotyping course and official pretotyping Slack community. He is one of the OG pretotypers, and he's from the land of kangaroos, Vegemite, and box jellyfish. Please welcome Leslie Barry.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's good, man. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited about this podcast. It's about time we had a pretotyping podcast, so well done to both of you for getting this going. And yeah, super excited to talk about all things pretotyping.
Yeah, thanks a bunch for being on. But to kick things off, we'll have kind of a lighthearted question, which is, what do you think are some things about Australia that what are some of the stereotypes about Australia that are true, and which ones are not as true?
Okay, there's a few. So one, that there's kangaroos all over the place. And strangely enough, I've been in Australia about 13 years now. There's 50 million kangaroos, but we live in the cities, so you hardly ever see them. So there's tons of them, but they're just not hopping around all over the place. I think another thing that surprised me in Australia is it's way, way bigger than you think it is. So everyone underestimates their travel. The Australian landmass is the same as the US, but we've got 25 million people clustered around 3 major cities and a few smaller ones. So that people find quite surprising, I think. And then another thing would be the weather is extreme. It's crazy. You'll have massive floods up in the northeast, and simultaneously you'll have everything burning down in the south at the same time. So the weather's quite dramatic. So whoever settled the place was tenacious, much like most countries. And one last thing is, we wouldn't be seeing dead drinking Foster's Lager. So Foster's Lager is something that some clever person marketed to the US so that everyone can pretend that they're Australians. And it's a super friendly bunch of people. So that's sort of my summary of Australia.
Those are some things I've heard. I've always wanted to actually come and visit Australia. I've heard the beaches in Australia are some of the best in the world. It's definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, magnificent place. It's beautiful.
All right, Robert, you want to kick off the pretotyping questions?
Yeah, so I had to get up myself on mute because I'm with my 8-year-old son who's also at school. So every so often, if you hear Miss Shields or Miss Aiken, then I have to kind of go on mute for a little bit. So far, we've been handling it just fine. And you have your headphones on. I know. It's fine. So Leslie, a lot of people are going to be tuning into this podcast and still wondering in the back of their mind, what is pretotyping? So could you give your version of what this word means and what it's all about?
Absolutely. So I had this question around 2015 when I was running an innovation team to figure out, how do we test ideas as fast as possible for the least amount of money? And there's what we know at the time was design thinking, lean startup, experimentation, fail fast or die, and all this kind of stuff. And what I was looking for was a way to rapidly test ideas and figure out what customers do versus what they say they do. And this is where I discovered pretotyping and bumped into Alberto, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later, the creator of pretotyping. So what is pretotyping? The question that always comes up is, I'll go, they go, what do you do, Leslie? I'll say, well, I help customers test business ideas at scale in enterprises and early stage innovators by measuring what customers do versus what they say. And they say, how do you do that? And I say, pretotyping. They say, don't you mean prototyping? And I go, no, I mean pretotyping. So prototyping is trying to figure out, can we make this thing or can we do this thing? And the answer is, it's 2021, we can make everything. Or virtually everything. What we need to figure out is, should we do this in the first place? And how do we figure that out as fast as possible by getting out the building in front of customers, whether it's virtually or in person, to measure what customers do. So prototyping is a set of rigorous It's a rigorous scientific process to figure out what are you trying to learn up front, how would you measure what good looks like, and what's the smallest possible experiment you can run to get in front of a customer to test and get a data point so that you know whether this is worth taking the next step in terms of validating business ideas.
And what is pretotyping ideally for? What situations would someone consider it?
What we're finding with customers, so we've run well over 1,000 prototypes with various customers over the last 3 years, from corporates through regulated industries right down to early stage startups. And it's for, if you identify a problem set for a customer and you have multiple possible solutions, how do you validate which possible solution is the right one for the customer to solve their problem? So if you know the problem and you know the solution, don't run experiments, don't prototype, just go and do it, go and execute. But if you're unsure of what the solution could be, go and test it. Secondly, you need a risk appetite. So what we find, and my favorite line is, you'll talk to clients, especially enterprise clients, and everyone wants to test new ideas and everyone wants to innovate, but nobody wants to fail, nobody wants to take any risk, and nobody wants to experiment. So I always say to them is like, everyone wants to innovate, but nobody likes change. So if you have zero risk appetite and you think you know the answer to all the questions of what product and services your customers are going to love in the future, which is naive in my opinion, you're not going to use prototyping. You have to cross the barrier in your mind that you'd have to take small amounts of risk. But the way we do that is very much why prototyping's worked in practice with customers in the enterprise has been, it's a rigorous process that reduces and mitigates risks. You don't want people to take risk unnecessarily and break stuff, but you want to give them enough leeway in a structured way that's measured, that allows them to take risk in a bit of a controlled framework. And if I meander, please bring me back because I tend to do that a bit. So
it's totally all right. I would have done the same thing if I started talking about prototyping. So there is a risk appetite involved with the process. Have you found certain personalities are engineered towards prototyping? Are they the kind of folks that are in certain disciplines, or is it across the board in your experience?
It's been surprising. So if I have to generalize, I would say it's, the innovators in the organization, which is a rounding error. It's normally 0.5% of the organization, because everyone else's job correctly is to execute the industrialized process to make the money, or as they should. But a part of the organization needs to be not doing that. But what we see is it'll be at a leadership level, anyone who's like responsible for product or strategy or growth. And then in the teams, it'll be product managers, service designers, customer-facing people. The people that resist it the most initially will be, obviously, risk and governance, legal, marketing, strangely enough, and the engineers. Like, engineers are an interesting crowd because this is software engineers and people have to execute things and keep things stable, because they all resist it rigorously or vigorously until they see that it works with evidence, and then they become excellent prototypers because they believe the process and they can do it in a structured way. What I see, one more thing on that, what I see in the workshops is I run these workshops of around 20 people to teach them how to prototype and actually execute them over a day or two. And we always get like 3 or 4 innovators, a few product people, and then I insist on people from legal, risk, governance, compliance, call centers, because they seem like people that would resist. But as soon as they see that this is structured and you're not going to break stuff, they flip very quickly. And strangely enough, a lot of the innovation comes from there, because those are the people that have been stuck in the bowels of the organization, with respect, who no one's been listening to, and they see all the problems, so they're able to surface that and embrace it.
Sounds interesting. So when you first started on this journey for prototyping for yourself and decided to start Exponentially, what kind of potential did you see in the market back then for this sort of approach? and how has that evolved to where we are today in 2021?
Great question. So I've built a few startups in my time and failed at a lot of them. And the lesson I learned was I know that I don't know. So once I discovered this method with Alberto at the company I was working with, we executed it inside the company for a year or two. And as I decided to step out and go do this full-time as a business, which was around 2017, and pretty risky because no one knows what prototyping is. No one knows who the hell or cares who Leslie Barry is. I'm just a person. And what is this new method? But at the time, in the innovation ecosystem, we were at that sort of second phase. The first phase was everyone hires a startup guy in the innovation team, then they fire them every 18 months because they don't deliver returns quick enough. Then we create vertical accelerators, then we create incubators inside. That also doesn't work, and going through this whole process. The second phase in my mind was clients getting savvy to go, hang on a second, we need a bit more structure around this, and the stuff that we're trying to do at the moment isn't working. And in my mind, this worked. It was gold. So I caught up with Alberto Savoya. He gave me access to his Stanford material. And to answer your question, the way Exponentially started was I just did it. I stepped up my job and I thought, great. I was talking at a conference on experimentation and innovation, and I reframed my talk around prototyping without the conference people knowing, because it was a prototype. So I just changed it. They can't stop you once you're talking. And I sold one to an insurance company, one workshop. And what I mean by that was they called me in for a coffee and they said, we love this idea. How do you do it? And I wasn't expecting the coffee, by the way. So I said, oh, we run workshops. I said, so great. How long are the workshops? I go, 2 days. And I'm making it up based on a discussion with Alberto. And they said, when are you free? So I said, hold on, look at my diary. Nothing in my diary. I'm free in 2 weeks' time. And I worked with Alberto to develop the workshop, and we ran one. So we sold one. And then I thought, okay, there's something here, but that's just the first result of the first experiment. And then I thought, okay, now I'm going to sell 2 and then 3 and then 4, and then it just grew from there. So what happened was, it wasn't completely random. I had the experience around doing it. I knew what I was doing. I knew how to sell it and communicate it. But the lesson I learned from startups was a mistake we make in the beginning is we think too early about scale. Like, how do we scale this? What happens when it becomes an Amazon? Like, that's BS. It's like, the problem isn't that. The problem is, how do you solve the first one? How do you solve the second one? How do you solve the third one? And over time, I listened to what the customers wanted, and it evolved into what the business currently is.
So if you were to kind of take a little bit of a crystal ball into 2021 and can forecast how you're going to be using prototyping into the future, what are some hints that your instinct is telling you about?
This probably also ties into COVID-19. So what happened last year was, with the lockdown, it completely disrupted my business model, because it was in-person workshops and 2-week sprints with customers to teach them how to do it, how to scale prototyping and experimentation. So we quickly had to pivot to running those workshops remotely via Zoom, which we've all done, so it's not unique. We quickly had to, luckily we'd built an internal tool, the Exponentially app, to manage experimentations at scale, because it's a tricky thing to do inside an organization. So we leveraged that quickly and figure out how to get the rigor of and the discipline of experimentation. We also built out an online training course to scale the training. And the reason I'm telling you that is not to sell it to you, but 2021 is the opportunity is to scale that out with more clients. The challenge is, I think the challenge for a COVID environment is selling to new customers. So customers are getting bombarded currently with LinkedIn, with video, with all sorts of things, because that's how we can get to them. But that in-person relationship-based selling, I think, is going to be tricky. So that's the business side. from a customer perspective, I attended the Lean Innovators Educators Summit with Steve Blank and Jerry Engel just before Christmas, and there were about 500 educators from around the world in that. And the quote that stood out there for me was, I can't remember who said it, and I'd like to give them credit, and we could probably do it in the show notes afterwards, but was the beauty of COVID-19, if there's a good takeaway, is everyone's experienced a disruption in product market fit, which I thought was really powerful because everyone's experienced disruption. So as innovators and experimenters, we know experimentation works. We know everyone should be doing this. It's a no-brainer. It's bewildering that more companies aren't doing this. So I think the opportunity for prototyping and experimentation and lean startup and all the work that's getting done in the space is customers suddenly realize, hang on a second, all the data and information we had about our customers based on market research up until the beginning of 2020 is now almost not valid anymore because customers are behaving completely differently. So we have to go and retest and re-experiment. So I think the opportunity for customers is quickly get out there and experiment, test, and figure out what your customers want and how they behave. Sorry, our customers and their customers. And the opportunity for us is to help them do that.
Yeah, I think the experimentation aspect of what you're talking about is probably going to be pretty relevant. I mean, in contrast to what you're talking about with in-person workshops, I was doing virtual workshops to begin with. So my problem was at the complete opposite end, where I had all of these inquiries at February, March going, we needed to transform our business. We don't know what to do. Our revenue models are shot. We have to figure out a new way of kind of going about things. And I had some answers for some people, and other ones I said, well, I know somebody else you should talk to. But I would gather from March until June, it was nonstop. It literally, I almost had to cancel an online conference because of it. But yeah, now that it's finally settled down and people get the sense that we're turning this huge round corner, the in-person option may come about. But in a way, and I'd like to ask you, this will be my last question before I bring it over to Jonathan. I've been reading articles and hearing people saying that the work model has changed fundamentally across the world, where it is no longer actually critical for people to meet face to face to get work done. That if depending on the type of work you do, you now have an option that's more economically affordable for businesses. It's more viable for workers, that you can leverage these technologies now. And we have this huge kind of shared experience around how to do it and what not to do. Do you think that even though we're going to be all vaccinated someday, hopefully by the end of the year, that dynamic is going to fundamentally change how we do business and how we go about prototyping?
That's a good question. So a few things. I think we're a long way from this being over. So I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think the reality, if you look at the numbers, we have to vaccinate 7 billion people twice and manufacture that. So that's a few years. Being vaccinated doesn't stop you from infecting other people. So wherever you're traveling to has to be fully vaccinated as well. Otherwise, you're a risk to them. And we're not behaving well. So what Australia, I'll come back to your question, but what Australia did really well was they locked us down hard. We had one of the harshest lockdowns in Melbourne in Australia, where I'm in the world. And we went from 700 cases a day, which is laughable compared to what's going on in your country, sadly. From 700 cases a day, lockdown for 111 days, down to 66 days of 0 cases. So it works. Lockdowns work, contact tracing work, masks work. So we don't behave well. So fast forward to your question. I live in the city, and my view is all these office buildings that have been empty for nearly a year now. So I think fundamentally, yes, things are going to shift. I also think humans are creatures of habit, and we're optimistic and we forget very quickly. So as soon as we're allowed to go and play again, we're going to go and play as hard as we can. But from a work point of view, I think we're going to end up with a blended model. So there's some things that, and the dollar drives every conversation and every decision. So there's some things that make a lot of sense. So will I fly to another city for a 1-hour meeting with a customer? No, I don't think that's going to happen again. I think that's going to fade away. But well, can we do transactional work? Absolutely. Can we do knowledge work? Absolutely. Can we do what we're doing right now in 3 different countries? Absolutely. But what's missing is in our space, there's a bit of, I hate the word like synergy, but there's a bit of this spontaneity and synergy and feeding off each other in the early stage of ideation and experimentation. It's very, very important to have other human beings in the room. I think when you get onto a Zoom kind of thing, you get very transactional. We get in, we do our thing, and we exit. And you lose that spontaneous sort of brainstorming kind of effect and creating ideas and sparking ideas. There's ways to do it, of course. I don't think it's as effective. So I think there's a component of a day or two of rubbing up against each other and socializing and learning from each other in a like a organic way. And there's a way to do this. But fundamentally, in summary, I think it'll shift. I think where before we had probably 20% of this happening, I think it'll go to maybe 50%. And in terms, sorry, the second part of your question was around, will it change prototyping and experimentation? 100%. Like we have been able to execute, we've had 2 large customers over the last year. We've been able to execute 123, I think, experiments on real world things virtually, because there's very smart ways to do it. And the customers have now been trained that this is a normal way to do things.
I agree. Jonathan, what do you got for our guest, Leslie Berry?
Yeah, I mean, kind of when you were talking about, just, hard lockdowns, first off, I mean, sometimes like, I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because like, sometimes like I think like when I get like new lockdown announcements, especially announced in the UK, where, I mean, admittedly things in a global context like aren't as sharp, or I guess aren't as hard as like a lot of the other countries around. But then like, I guess when we get like new restrictions announced, like I always like half the time I go on Google like, all right, which countries have it worse, just to make myself feel a little bit better. And then like usually at the top of the list is either Australia or Ireland. And then I go through kind of like the rules that you guys have, and I'm like, okay, I feel a little bit better about myself.
Yeah, you got it easy.
A little bit easier. But I'd like to take you back to actually kind of like, when we were talking about earlier about the story about how you met Alberto, because I know that like, I think you went through a fairly like, Alberto kind of made you jump through some hoops, and, you kind of had to put some effort, to be able to meet him. So tell us kind of like the story about like how Alberto finally agreed to sit down, meet with you, and work together with you.
Sure, no problem. So for context, for anyone who's listening, Alberto Savoia is the creator of Pretotyping. They put it together at Google when they were trying to solve this problem of rapid validation, Alberto and a team. He's since been teaching it at Stanford University. He's written a book on it, The Right It, which you can pick up. He launched that in 2019. And I've been working with him since 2015. But it's a good story because I was in full hustle mode. So I discovered this method and I really wanted to learn how to do it in 2015. And if you know Alberto, he's an engineer. He's very single-minded and protective of his time, and he wants to do, and he executes well on what he does. So I phoned him up. We happened to be going to San Francisco later that year for CES, I think it was, Consumer Electronics Show, with my team. And I phoned him and I said, "Hey Alberto, I've seen this prototyping thing in your little booklet, your PDF. Can you teach us how to do this for a day? We'll pay you for your time." So he said, "No, I don't know who you are. Go away. I'm preparing for Stanford." I'm like, "Okay, great answer. No problem. I'll phone you tomorrow." And he said, "I said, no." I said, "Okay, awesome. I'll phone you tomorrow." So the next day I phoned him back and I said, "Alberto, it's me again. I'm not going to go away. I really want you to teach us. Give me a number and we'll pay you to teach us." And he said, "Well, I looked you up on LinkedIn and you sort of know what you're doing and that. So if you can be, on this date and sort of, here's my fee, we'll do it." So I said, "Done. Okay, we'll do it." So it was really good. So we flew up, spent a day with him. He taught us through the method and everything. And we were just hooked from that moment on, and we brought it back and did it. But it was really part of the startup hustle gene that I've got, which is start at the top and no is just their first offer and you wear them down until they say yes. Like you did to me, Jonathan.
Kinda. I don't know. I mean, do you think I wore you down enough?
You didn't, but you were persistent, which is great. I love it. That's how you get through.
Yeah. It's lesson learned for anybody listening. And kind of going off of that, using good adjectives only. How would you describe Alberto's personality?
He's interesting. He's an engineer, so he's very precise. So what an answer, a way to describe his personality is this. I got him on call with one of my clients who's a very senior leader at university, and we're talking about risk and prototyping and things. And he's done this a few times in the Slack channel too, which is like someone will ask a question and you got to say, that's a general answer. There's a general question, so I'll give you a general answer. If you give me a precise question, I'll give you a precise answer. And that's the best way to describe him. He's persistent, he's smart, he thinks deeply. I'm not trying to blow too much smoke here, but he's very convinced and convincing about this method because it works. And the reason people start using prototyping is because, as he says, it can't not work. It's just math. You do it, you execute, and if it's not math-based, Alberto's not interested. But he's great. I mean, he's massively supportive of everything we're doing.
I remember that you gave that answer to actually somebody within our Pretotyping Slack community. I think somebody like asked a while back, it was like, when do you think like Pretotyping doesn't work? And then like, yes, I remember you answered, Pretotyping can't not work. And I had to and I had to try to wrap my mind around like, is it like, it's a triple negative. So does it mean that doesn't mean it can't work, or does it mean it can't not work? Of course, we all know what it means. Like no matter what happens, prototyping always works, because even if you completely butcher your experiment and get zero skin in the game, you've proved that your idea doesn't have any, nobody wants your idea, and you can go on, move on to the next project.
Or you've proved that you don't have enough information to think through your idea in a clear way, which is great. So you're not skipping over the deep thinking step of figuring out what am I actually trying to learn with these customers, rather than just rushing to get in front of customers.
Right, exactly. And so kind of going off of that, having read through a lot of the dialogue that you've had with a lot of the members of the prototyping community, what are some of the most memorable interactions you remember, or just problems that people have proposed within the prototyping Slack community that you'd like to share with us?
Well, to touch on the Slack community, it's been really valuable. So I've been shouting down an echo chamber for 3 years now in Australia, working with our customers. And I've tried LinkedIn, and I see Robert's successfully got a LinkedIn channel up and running. But I've tried LinkedIn, Facebook, forums for years now to try and get something going, and it just didn't land. And the reason it didn't land was because you needed, the nature of experimentation is actually your strategic projects going forward, and you don't necessarily want to share those with the broad audience. Okay, so how do you ask questions? How do you create community around it? And why Slack worked initially was Slack creates, it's not the ideal tool, but it creates a trusted environment that's peer validated of real people, not talking nonsense and trolling each other. So that worked well. And it's been a huge learning experience for me because a lot of the things, I've been doing this so long now that I make assumptions around what people understand. So there was a huge discussion around the XYZ hypothesis. What is it? How do you frame it? How do you word it? Bearing in mind, a lot of people just jump in and go like, hey, here's an idea, but they haven't read the books. They don't know what prototyping is or done the course. And we gently nudge them back to go to the course just so you can learn, or go to the book or chat to one of us. So it's helped ask the hard questions like, that's great, we get it in theory, but specifically, what is this thing? How do I test this thing? And Alberto did a bunch of videos around that. Other discussions that have been valuable have been around, that's great, but give us very specific examples of how would I run this thing? Or how would I test this thing? And I love, there's a member in there, Sibel, who was one of our first certified prototypers. And she's in Canada and she's embraced this fully. So she's made a little video of like, this is my prototype and what does the community think? So if I zoom out, what's been amazing has been how many people there are of caliber that are really thinking deeply about experimentation, how supportive they are of each other, and how open people are counterintuitively to me. Some data versus opinion. My opinion was people don't want to share, and the story I told you up front. The data is people absolutely will share in a trusted environment because we're learning from each other. And once you get over the barrier of, I have to protect my idea because someone's going to steal it, and you put it out there, like nobody's going to steal it because nobody's got your passion, and nobody wants to execute it with the passion and capability and resources you have. So that's been really interesting to see. So yeah, that would be sort of the highlights out of what I took from the Slack group. I'm really enjoying the cut and thrust, and that people feel, and you and Robert are great at this, to challenge very hard all the assumptions that we're making and be direct with people. Like there's too much fluff going on. We say, oh, it's an awesome idea. It's like, no, it's like if the customer doesn't want it, it's not an awesome idea. It doesn't matter, you know?
Yeah. It's crazy you mention that. It's almost like, and I don't know how Robert feels, but at least me personally, it's almost like, in a sense, I get almost like satisfaction out of like, being able to like, critically, challenge people on their ideas. Yes. Because it's almost like, I remember people doing that to me, when I was like, a newbie founder. And then now, like, I've learned a lot about prototyping, and I've gotten enough knowledge to the point where I get to do that to other people. And it's just like, kind of like almost like, it's almost like what I call it. It's like a Jedi moment where it's just like you've leveled up. You've leveled up to the point where like now you can like you can start poking holes at other people's ideas, and you almost feel like for like at least 2 seconds you feel like Jason Kalankis. You feel like this top-notch angel investor. You feel like you can just tell anybody what to do, even though you come back down to earth. And it's like, I'm still building out my career. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
But and I love how you brought up Cybele, because Cybele is actually our first guest on this podcast.
Great.
And she talked about I think the prototype that she built at home. So she was able to go in depth with it, and it was really awesome to hear her, kind of go in depth with like her prototype, and like how she's kind of like set her own XYZ hypothesis with it. And yeah, it was really it was cool to hear from her. So you'll get to hear her episode soon.
Great stuff. Look forward to it.
Yeah. So I guess probably one last question from my end before we go on to the next segment is like, kind of like, what do you, even though prototyping has been like kind of like has made a lot of headwind, and a lot more people are knowing about prototyping, the vast majority of the world and the startup world doesn't understand what prototyping is, particularly around at least from my point of view, particularly around Europe, right? Europe is definitely a region that a lot of people see as being kind of slow to adapt certain ideologies. What do you think is kind of like the challenge to get, what do you think is the biggest challenge in order to get prototyping to like a much more mainstream mentality, almost to like, lean startup kind of levels of popularity?
An excellent question. It's one of those hidden gems that when people discover it, I'm not saying this because I do it for a living. I do it for a living because people have reacted to it this way. Once they see it, they can't unsee it. So it's magical when you run a workshop or you do training, like people come in skeptical, they leave as evangelists, not because I'm awesome, but because it just works and it makes sense, okay? And it's bewildering to me that more people don't know about it, but I think it boils down to just community and marketing. I think the Lean, Eric Ries and Lean Startup, and Barry O'Reilly with Unlearn, and the Design Thinking Crew and ThoughtWorks with Agile, and all these companies have been really good at building a community and marketing around this and driving it really hard. And I think it's just more of the same. I've seen more growth in the community that's been sort of surfaced in the last 3 or 4 months, specifically with the work that you two are doing around the design sprints that Robert's doing, the work that you're doing, Jonathan, the LinkedIn groups, the Slack channels. It sounds simple, but that Slack channel has gone from 0 to 220 people, which is not a lot by internet scale, but in 4 months, the LinkedIn group's got 200 and something people in it. And all those people know people who know people. And as more people start using it and evidencing it and getting educated on it, it grows like crazy. Alberto's book, of course, helps because that spreads the word, but it's just more of the same. It's like just we have to tell more people about it. We have to show more people that it works and create evidence and let it go. Failing a marketing budget of a few $1 million, getting the word out there, it's very difficult to get this out there. And a podcast like this, of course, helps.
Yeah.
Carpet bombing. We have to carpet bomb everybody with everything, like podcast videos, design sprints, prototypes, training, just tell everyone.
We're really hoping this podcast blows up. I mean, it might not even be a secret. I mean, Robert knows it too, but we really want this podcast to blow up. Like, we're hoping that like once we release the first few episodes, that like you, Alberto, almost everybody on the Pretotyping Slack channel gives a review, blasts it on their LinkedIn channel, and like really uses it as like kind of like a platform to like get even more people knowing about Pretotyping than before.
Well, one thing I am doing is treating this entire experiment like a prototype. So that the idea is that we're seeing the skin of the game that we're going to look for is subscriptions. People actually subscribe to the podcast looking for more episodes. So we can be enthusiastic and really gung-ho about this, but what does the market think? And we alluded to that in a recording earlier today. It's like, okay, you want to see more of what we're going to be doing in the future with prototyping and bringing guests on and even experimenting ourselves. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and that'll be our kind of like test to see if we can get those 10 people or that 10% that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's spot on. And words of wisdom. It's like every single thing is a prototype, like including what we're doing right now.
The reason why I asked the question before about who's more aligned with prototyping is because I saw the same thing happen with design sprints. There were certain people that aligned with the process that became its evangelists, or were able to showcase the return on investment of kind of getting involved with that, how it basically could change the dynamics of how people go about doing work. And I kind of have a feeling that prototyping is the same way, in that there's certain particular people like myself and like Jonathan and others that once we know about it and we can do it, then we've set the example for others and how it gets done. And then by that, we find evangelists. When you've done client work in the past, Leslie, have you experienced this dynamic where you're the person who's the authority on prototyping in the room, along with your staff? How do you find what do you discover when people go through this process and come up to you later on and say, hey, I'm really interested in this? Do they have a certain dynamic to them? Do they have like a certain outlook on things, or is it across the board?
That's another good question. So I learned a valuable lesson. So when I started the business, I was going prototyping, everything else is junk. Very bad way to sell anything. So what I realized very quickly, or slowly, so a year in, I realized that I was losing when I started the workshop, there's out of 20 people, I'd say 6 of them were leaning forward, interested. 15 were leaning back with their arms folded, looking at me very skeptically because their boss had forced them into this thing. And when I dug into that a bit, I realized very quickly, I wasn't positioning prototyping as a way to accelerate your current process. I was positioning it as extra work and something else that you have to do on top of what you're currently doing, and a replacement process. So when I repositioned it to go and acknowledge, so people come into the room with a set of skills. So they're design thinkers, they're human-centered design experts, they're customer specialists, they're marketing experts. They've done market research their whole life the traditional way. And what you're doing is you're confronting that and you're going like, that's wrong, this is the better way to do it. When I flip that around to go, which is true, like all those things are valuable, but they're valuable in context. So if you're discovering problems, use this method. If you're exploring potential solutions, use this method. But when you're testing, how are you testing? If you currently have a way to test with customers to get data, go and do that. That's great. If you don't, here's a way to test faster. And that small shift in approach completely changes the dynamic in the room. So that was one thing I learned, which is important. To directly answer your question, I think the people that are coming to me afterwards are where the penny has dropped, are people that have been hunting, people know that what they're doing is potentially not working, but they do it because it's their day job and they have to do it. Okay. And when you present them with an alternative and then they go, this may be a way to get better results faster for my day job, those people convert very quickly. So like yourselves, design thinkers not convert, it sounds like a religion, but design thinkers will adopt this approach and integrate it into their business very quickly. As I said, product people, absolutely. Market research people that have been traditionally going, and there's value in this, like discovering how people think, but the way we validate products is like, we used to do this terribly at the one company. We go, come to the pub, we'll give you $100 and some free beer and we'll show you our product. What do you think of our product? And they go, we love your product. No, they don't. They love free beer and $100. And then we take that back and we go, 64% of our customers love our product. Like, so the people whose job it was to do that stuff inside the organization weren't comfortable that it was a good way to validate. So that's probably the best. It's a bit fuzzy, but it's the best answer I can give you.
That works for me. So let's say I am Joe Smith and I have just picked up the right it. And I am venturing out into prototyping, or at least I'm trying to see how it fits into my current tool set. If you had a beginner's kind of checklist of how someone can properly understand and be able to practice prototyping as a beginner, what are some initial stages or initial tips, I guess you could say, that you would give someone who is just starting out with this?
Okay, good question. So there's a lot of resources, but the way I think about this is there's a few things we have to solve for beginners. First of all, what is prototyping? Secondly, how do I practically do prototyping? Thirdly, how does it fit into, so if it's an enterprise customer, if Joe works for a company, how does this fit into my day job? Or if Joe's an entrepreneur, then how can I use this on my startup idea? And then the next step would be, how do I do this consistently at scale? So that's the problems we're trying to solve. So what Joe would do is pick up the book, read the Write It, get all enthusiastic because Alberto's style is fantastic and he gives good examples. And then I would encourage Joe to do one, not overthink it, just run an experiment. And it doesn't have to be, the beauty of an experiment, it doesn't have to be perfect. All you have to do is, as Steve Blank says many years ago, get out of the building, and Paul Graham. All you have to do is do one. So take the book, and because what we do often is we'll read the thing, go, that's awesome, but not actually practice it. So get it, just run a prototype with anything, like make something up and go and run an experiment. You'll realize very quickly that you don't know how to run an experiment, because as Alberto says, and this is why we work so well together, the book will tell you what it is and some examples. What I'm teaching practically is how to do that and how to execute it. So the reason I built the online course was to scale out the how, like how do we actually run a prototype? What does it look like? So I would go and figure out how to run one, and you can do the course. If you don't want to do the course, there's a ton of online material available. Robert, you probably can drop your links in the podcast notes, but you've got a bunch of stuff that you've done which talks through it. Alberto's got an online channel talking through specifically how to run prototypes and different questions you've got. So there's some free resources there. On my site, exponentially.com, there's a bunch of free resources there on how to run this. And then Joe would probably have to answer the next question, which is, I want to do this at work. How do I convince my boss? At that point, you probably need to bring in the big guns, which is one of us, to help have the conversation at an executive level to figure out how does this fit in with your process. And then Joe would also have to figure out how to run this at scale, because that gets complicated very quickly.
Okay, just making sure I'm not on mute. So with that those all sound really great. But let's say someone, and this happened recently with me in a workshop. Let's say that part of your audience is not oriented towards a sales-based prototype. Maybe they're looking to understand the desirability of a feature from an existing user base. How have you seen prototypes be executed in a non-sales way, like in some other fashion?
Sure. Can I talk about enterprise, or is that okay?
Please do.
Like a corporate? Yeah.
Yep.
So we've done this a lot with our clients, where the majority of what customers really do in innovation is continuous improvement around products, feature sets. Very few companies, or a low percentage of what they're doing is actually out there, kind of Horizon 2, Horizon 3 stuff. So what they would do is go like, let's say we want to offer a customer, or take away a feature, let's say we want to offer a new reporting feature to a customer. So in the call center, people are phoning in, I wish I could click a button and get ABC report. And one way to do it is to go build it. Another way to do it is we get them to use an A/B testing tool, or to pop up a button on a website saying, download ABC report, as an example, which would be a feature test. When they click the button, we measure, that's the skin in the game. The report doesn't exist. We measure the response, and we can get back to them. We can either manually, so in the corporate space, what we would do is we'd do a mechanical Turk prototype and manually send them the report, so we'd make sure the report is there. So we're not lying to the customer, we're deceiving them, we're fulfilling it, but to contain that to like 100 people, and we measure how many people are clicking that button, because that's the point of intent, if it makes sense. The thing we have to do very carefully is context absolutely matters. So we have to be really careful where you put that it's in the user's workflow, and it's a natural extension of the workflow, and it's a place they would find that. So we spend a lot of work figuring out what that looks like. And maybe, you gave me a general question. Maybe if you give me an example that's more specific, I can talk through how we would do that. But that's typically how we would do that. We'd inject something into the existing user's workflow as an experiment to measure if it's something they want to execute. And we do it a lot with features, new features.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So let's say someone is looking to add a new feature to an existing user who has a membership, and they want to know if they place it in a certain place in a workflow or in a donation kind of buy flow or whatever it may be, that it not only is it going to attract their attention, but the one click through, or the commitment to add it onto their would you say, their membership for a particular fee, or to just for some sort of opt-in. They looked at it from a traffic perspective, like analytics, but they also tracked whether or not somebody clicked the button, and then they would just do like a lot of optimization. But in that way, there's still intention commerce involved with that particular transaction that does affect the business. It's just not an outright purchase. So what you're describing is essentially the same thing.
Yes, exactly that. So we've done a lot of work with a client. I don't want to mention who the client is, but they were testing a new service that was around health and well-being for their customer base or the user base. So we simulated a chatbot, because there was a lot of chatter. So what you're trying to do, there's a few things you said that are really important. Like, first of all, like if you have data where you know customers want it, then just make it. But if you don't, like you get into these endless debates around, on this cluttered page, we've got this one piece of property that people land on, and we know that's trafficked, we know it's the right customer, we know it's the right type of customer, and we want to measure this additional behavior. So do we make it a button? Do we make it a red button or a yellow button, which is just A/B testing? Or do we add a chatbot, or is it a menu link, whatever? And the answer is yes. Like if you don't know, test all those things. So week 1, add an extra link. Week 2, add a button. Week 3, simulate a chatbot that then allows you, chatbots are fantastic for prototyping, that allows you to test multiple things. But what you don't do is test how much traffic goes to the website, and you also don't do how many people click on the chatbot. What you do is how many people interact with the chatbot with 2 or 3 interactions. So you know they're actually getting drawn into the value proposition, and then you're able to test it. So in that case, that's how we do it. The trick is do it in a way that is real. So this is not an intentional, this is not a, would you like one of these things? Because then you're getting an opinion. It's like, this is a real thing. Engage with it. If they engage and the measure makes sense and passes your XYZ, your hypothesis, then you learn what the next step is.
So could you get in a little, and we're closing out our session, but I'd like to remark a little bit on Exponentially and what your business does and what it's all about and where they can go to find out more.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So what Exponentially is we help customers test business ideas using prototyping. And we do a few things. So we help you understand what prototyping is. The way we do that is we run 2-day workshops remotely at the moment for teams of up to 20 to teach you what prototyping is, the basics of it, how to execute it, and you leave there having executed real-world prototypes using our Exponentially app, which is a tool that we use to run experiments and track experiments. We then follow that up with a 2-week rapid experimentation sprint, or 1 or 2 week, we can customize that, which is working with your teams to teach you on your actual ideas and projects how to run these prototypes. And once again, we use the Exponentially app to do that. We also offer online training. So that's an online training course. It's about probably 6 hours of content. It takes 2 to 3 weeks to complete. Where we'll teach you how to do this. So it's effectively an online workshop that's condensed into this. You will end with building prototypes, a live prototype inside the Exponentially app. You get full support on the Slack channel and get plugged into that. And we'll do an assessment and help you with your first prototype and get that up and running. At the end of that, we've got a prototyping certification to become a certified prototyper. And over and above that, we do consulting around this early stage experimentation process as a business. So how do you set this up? How do you embed it? Because at an enterprise level, how do you scale this consistently and make this part of the way you execute experiments in your business for perpetuity, in the future? So that's effectively what we do as a business. Just to add to that, we've done this with about 35 tier 1 companies in Australia, Singapore, and the US. We've trained about 800 prototypers so far. So we've got a lot of experience doing this across all industries. So we've done this in mixed reality, financial services, startups, accelerators, insurance. It works everywhere.
And do you have any particular events coming up in February or March that you'd like to kind of plug? Anything that you want people to know about beyond your prototyping course that you're currently doing?
Nothing specifically. Most of the work is for private customers at the moment, so no public-facing events. We haven't ramped that up yet. That's the next prototype. I think you're doing a lot more of that than I am at the moment. But if you want to find out anything more, just go to exponentially.com. And you can learn all about what we're doing at the moment. And a big shout out to absolutely, if you want to get very quick value, just join the Pretotyping Slack channel. We'll drop the link into the show notes for that too. You'll get a huge amount of value with some smart people.
You get a lot of us hanging around. And it's at a good point too, because there's a lot of questions going around. As well as some encouragement around people to do experiments, especially if they're gun shy around doing them. So if you ever had a curiosity about it, it's a perfect time to kind of get involved. Jonathan, you want to close it out with any kind of particular thing you want to do? Any questions?
Have you done any prototypes in your own life so far? Have you what's the latest prototype you've done for yourself?
We wanted to buy some furniture. So what we did was we got some boxes, which we have plenty of with online shopping. And we measured out what the furniture, the size of what the furniture would look like. We put the boxes in the place of where the furniture would be, and we lived with that for a while. So that was a prototype. I wanted to, I'm quite impulsive in terms of buying new things. So I wanted to buy something new for my office. I did the same thing, create the space, simulate what I'm doing. So I do that kind of thing. We're thinking of moving interstate potentially over the next year. So instead of just buying something, we're going to Airbnb for 2 or 3 months and prototype what it feels like to live in a new place. So we do that. We prototype everything. My wife is a born prototyper. She gets it.
This was our episode with Leslie Barry. Thanks for being on our show. And remember, audience, fail Ferrari fast, McDonald's cheap.